think we'll start with you, Moshe, and maybe you can just tell us briefly how would you define memory?
Well, it's a trick question. It's really hard to define, but I will tell you that memory is not one entity. As I'm sure all of you know, we have many types of memory: long-term, short-term, working memory, things that are more of emotional value. We have things that we are aware of the fact that we're remembering, but there are things that we don't know that we remember. So it's called implicit memory sometimes. There are different things that are different types of implicit memory. Some have more technical terms, such as priming, but you can think about skill learning, for example. Very often, you'll ask people to verbalize their memory of a certain skill that they own, and they won't be able to. So it's interesting that we don't necessarily have conscious access to all the things that we remember, even if we are able to use them. And in a corresponding manner, you also, science has been revealing more and more of how different parts of the brain are responsible to different types of memory. But memory, as you can imagine, is very pervasive. And you can say that the entire cortex is dedicated to memory in one way or another. So it's really in every corner of our mental lives. It's just a matter of what type of memory, but it's all over.
Josh, how did you come to think of memory? Do you have a quick definition?
That was exactly the answer you'd expect from a neuroscientist. But you'd get a completely different answer if you asked a historian what is memory, or if you asked a psychologist what is memory, or if you asked a psychiatrist what is memory, or if you asked a sociologist what is memory. And that points to the way that this sort of nebulous word, memory, is used so variously in so many different parts of our life. And by the way, you'd get a different answer from a memory champion, right? Who would say, memory is about being able to cram lots of information into your skull and then be able to spit it back out. But that's actually kind of a perversion of the kind of memory that Moshe is talking about. And the kind of memory training that I did and that I learned about. My book is about this subculture of competitive memorizers who train themselves using ancient techniques to perform remarkable mnemonic feats. What they're doing is taking the kind of memory that Moshe is talking about and applying it in a really sort of narrow, fixed way to remember, for example, the order of a shuffled pack of playing cards.
How did you yourself do this memory training?
I did it the same way that Cicero did it, that medieval scholars did it. It turns out that once upon a time, this notion of having a trained, disciplined memory was not nearly so weird an idea as it would seem to us to be today. People actually invested in their memories, and there was a set of techniques, of tricks that people knew about that were widely known and widely practiced, and were used to essentially learn how to learn. And then we no longer have to do that today because we've got books to store information for us. I've got an iPhone in my pocket that stores a lot of information for me. We don't have to invest in our memories the way that our ancestors once did. And so those techniques have sort of been forgotten about. Like, we don't really learn about them in school anymore. And the last place you find people still using them is at these kind of silly contests where people are memorizing decks of playing cards.
Moshe, what, once somebody does this, what makes something like stick in your memory? How do we determine what's important enough to hold on to?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and there are different answers to it. And now I'm afraid that Josh would say that that's what a neuroscientist would say. I'm trying to answer like a historian, but I can't. Well, obviously, things that are highly emotional are highly memorable, right? And one extreme is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's really the extreme, but it just shows how strong emotion, how strong is the role of emotion in leaving things in memory. But one of the most interesting, for me at least, and for the recent field that's called cognitive neuroscience, is more recent understanding that one of the most potent cues to leave information in memory is novelty. So, if you let me, I'll give a little introduction about why the word future in our title here. So one of the, and it might, for people who don't study memory, it might sound completely intuitive, and they'll be surprised that we're so excited about this. But just in the last maybe 5 or 7 years, researchers of memory and in the brain and in psychology overall, psychology is also in the brain, but I mean neuroscientists and psychologists alike, realizing more and more the role of memory in our thinking about the future. So generally, I know growing up would think that memory is like a photo album. It just helps you to reminisce or to remember things on demand for a specific task, but it's just a machinery there to entertain us almost. Whereas we realize more and more, and with the advent of imaging, that we can actually look at the brain systems that are recruited for different tasks, we realize that memory is there for the future. Memory is there like a big database that helps us prepare and helps us plan and helps us simulate different scenarios and be ready overall. So it's less of a photo album and more a machine that helps us survive in the future. What was the question? So that was the introduction, yes. But novelty then is very powerful piece of information or characteristic that leaves information in memory, because the brain seeks to expand this database that we have. We want to be ready to more scenarios in the future. We want to be able to plan for more possible contexts and alternatives. We want to be able to be ready for more, for a larger repertoire. And we are able to do this if we can expand our database. So again, excuse the technical terminology here, but it is a database, and to expand it, we continuously look for new things, because new things are things that by definition we don't know already. They're not in our memory yet. That's why advertisers that almost in every respect figured out things way before neuroscientists have, that's why every product has the word new in it. Something has to be new because it attracts attention. And capitalizing on these people who study babies who cannot communicate verbally yet, still we want to study how they think and how they do cognitive tasks, and we capitalize on the novelty. We know that the novel aspect in the display will grab their attention faster. And the reason we think is because whatever is novel can be added to my database and help me later on.
Josh, was the idea of novelty something that resonated for you as you were?
Well, I was going to say that's exactly the answer you'd expect to get from a Jew. I mean, in all seriousness, this notion of we have memories for the sake of projecting ourselves into the future is something that I think cognitive neuroscience is just starting to wrap its head around. But collectively, culturally, is a very, very old idea in the Jewish tradition that, like, part of the reason that we rehearse this set of memories that is the Jewish tradition is to prepare ourselves for what comes next, and to prepare ourselves for how to make decisions in the present and how to live our lives in the present. And that's actually what I think Moshe would agree our memories are doing on an individual level. The only reason we are stocking away this information, which is coming at an enormous expense, right? I mean, our brains consume a quarter of the glucose that we're ingesting. It's very, very energetically expensive to have a brain to form memories, to take the energy to actually record the past. The reason we do it is so that we can make sense of the present and plan for the future. And I guess it's a kind of Jewish notion.
Come to think of it, most of us researchers who study this question are Jews, so I think maybe you're onto something.
I'm just playing to the audience here, actually.
What about, is there a connection between like memory and prayer, or memory and meditation? Are those things that have been found to help enhance people's memories?
I'll let you
Anybody
start.
As far as I know, my basic understanding from my reading of the literature is that there's really not that much you can do to enhance your memory, short of making sure that you are physically fit. Like, all the evidence around eating the right kind of food, eating blueberries, omega-3, whatever, that it's all sort of neither here nor there. what I learned how to do was not how to improve any sort of underlying generalizable memory ability, but rather how to use the memory that we all have in a slightly more efficient way by just taking advantage of some basic principles about how our memories work. For example, that our memories, we have really exceptional visual memories, and if you can transform information into visual images, that gives you an advantage. But that's not improving your memory, that's just using the memory that you've got in a slightly more efficient manner.
Moshe, is memory indeed visual?
It-
Is it visual? Is
Well,
it a
it
visual thing?
actually varies between people. There are people that are more visual and people that are more, language oriented or other forms. But vision is a big, is maybe the major sense, the primary sense for humans at least. So a large part of memory is visual. But I won't say memory overall is visual thing. But I would actually add, I agree completely with Josh that food, there hasn't been found any specific, to my knowledge at least, any specific food that will be good for memory, but there are things that can optimize your performance, such as sleep, for example. So I think that you all notice about yourself that when you're well rested, overall cognitive performance is enhanced, but for memory specifically, people have found over and over, and this is an exciting set of literature, that even taking naps, not during our talks here, but afterward, you have to absorb some information, but even short naps actually help you consolidate memories. So even if we don't know how, but we know for sure that memory is important for memory consolidation.
I have a 7-month-old son, which is why I forgot about that. I mean, one of the things I'm interested in Moshe's work that I'd love to ask him about, if you don't mind, is a lot of your work is about how our memories shape our perception of the present, and how the things that we've got stored away in our memory banks are not really in a bank, but are really more like a lens that are helping us to make sense of the present. And I would love to hear you describe a little bit about your work in that area.
Thanks for the question. We've been interested in how our memories affect our perceptions. So subjectively, we feel that we understand our environment based on the incoming information through the senses. So I see certain things, I hear certain things, that's the world around me. But it's not really, it's an illusion. What is really happening is what we call a top-down flow of information. All these database and all these memories that we have send down the cortex expectations, what to expect from a certain environment, and it compares it with what comes in through the senses, right? So ideally, you would expect a system like this to just match what you expect from what you see, with what you see. But sometimes it also deceives us. We expect to see something and we see it, and it's not only vision is an example here, but it also can happen at higher levels of abstraction, that we expect hearing a certain things. I don't know if it happens to you, maybe it's just Israelis' impatience in dialogues and complete each other's sentences and thoughts, and sometimes complete them not in the intended way. So this can put you in the wrong trajectory. But yes, we are very much affected by what we remember when we perceive as we are by the senses.
Moshe, can you tell us a bit about your current research, maybe even walk us through a project that you're involved with?
Well, our current research actually focuses more on the next step, which is predictions, how the brain generates predictions, but it does relate also to memory. So we talked before about the top-down effect, or the effect of our expectations. So it's very interesting, and I think you all encountered cases where you expect to see something, you see it, but it's not there, and the other way around. When you're looking for something, it's just in front of your very eyes, and you just can't see it, it's just in front of you. So those cases of how expectations taint perception are things that we're really interested in. That's one flavor of projects going on in our lab. We also study things that in the face of it don't seem related to memory, but they are, which is mood and depression. And we find that depressed people are somewhat different in the way that they activate memories a more focused manner and less associative, whereas happier people tend to think more broadly and activate more remote associations, more remote links. The type that memory work, the type that of associations that are activated in depression is a little more focused. And interestingly, depressed are less prone to these memory distortions that we talked about. You know, if you give people a list of words that are highly related to each other, so I'd say sweet, lollipop, candy, and honey, and you ask afterwards, you give the subjects, the participants, words, and you ask them if they were in the list, and you ask them if the word sugar was in the list, but it wasn't. Everything else was related, and most people would tend to say, yes, sugar was there, because you activate this network of things that are related to each other, so depressed people won't fall into this trap, and they'll be more realistic in kind of black and white. That's because they activate less of this network, and they're more focused in a narrow manner.
Are you involved in studying memory loss at all?
Not directly, but there's interesting research in something that's called sometimes directed forgetting. It's hard to make people forget things. It's just like if I tell you don't think about polar bears, that's the only thing you're going to be thinking about. It's really hard to make people not think about specific things, other than making them non-interesting. Then they don't stick.
When you tell me don't think about polar bears, I'm still thinking about the Holocaust.
So can I ask Josh a question?
Please.
So it's interesting that a lot of the overlap in the brain, there's a lot of overlap in the brain between areas that are activated for memory tasks proper and between areas that are active when people are doing spatial navigation or spatial-oriented tasks. And I noticed that your method of memorizing this memory palace is very spatial. Have you tried in your methods to stick to things that are not space-related, things that are more grounded?
A number of the memory techniques don't actually rely on spatial navigation. So the hippocampus is this region of the brain that seems to be implicated not only in the consolidation of our long-term memories and our accessing our long-term memories, but also in spatial navigation, which is curious. But there are memory techniques that are simply about making associations, right? I mean, actually, you were talking about some of them earlier. Like one of the tricks for remembering people's names is you try and come up with an image that represents the person's name, and you tie it to some feature of their face. So, Sandy Borwarski, I picture some Nazis in snowsuits skiing down your face wearing bras, and that just always reminds me of your last name. There's no... You were thinking it too. There's nothing spatial about that, but that's just an association. And what you're doing is you're trying to put as many associational hooks as you can into a piece of information, because that's what makes things memorable. The more glue there is tying any given piece of information to all of the other information floating around in your skull, the more likely it is that you'll be able to find the fishing hook that pulls it back out when you want to remember it later.
But I think this, unless you want to comment on the associations.
Still trying to think about it.
But this ties perfectly to what we said about novelty as a strong cue for memory, because obviously if you had used boring associations, you would have not remembered all these things. So it has to be crazy because it's so different and it sticks, right?
And this is an example, by the way. So that is advice that, sure, we have understood in a laboratory setting in the 20th century that novelty makes things more memorable. That is something that was understood 2,000 plus years ago by the earliest Latin writers on memory. And they were talking about memory, and they were interested in memory from a very different perspective than you're interested in it. They wanted to know, how do we remember speeches? How do we remember the things that we're learning in school? They were practically interested in what makes things memorable. And they discovered, I would argue they discovered, a number of the principles that were rediscovered by modern cognitive scientists in the 20th century They just didn't have the jargon, the terminology to talk about them in the same way that we do today. But they understood novelty makes things memorable. Using spatial navigation in the process of remembering, that makes things more memorable. And they were right.
Can you explain the concept of the memory palace?
Okay, so the memory palace is one particular technique that was, according to legend, invented 2,500 years ago by a Greek poet called Simonides. And the basic idea is we have really terrific spatial memories. So if you were to come visit my apartment in New Haven, Connecticut, and if you were really nosy and you wandered around while my back was turned and opened the door to the bathroom and then looked in my fridge and saw what was inside, just wandered around my house for 2 minutes, you would walk out of my house with a really good mental map of where everything in my house was. And I think we all know that to be kind of intuitively true. We're really good at remembering spaces. So the idea of the memory palace is, what if while I was walking through Josh's apartment, I actually saw images representing the things that I wanted to remember. I would remember those images in those places in Josh's apartment, and instead of remembering that his sofa was against the left wall facing the windows, maybe instead I would remember that the first item I was going to talk about in my speech on the floor of the Roman Senate was going to be water. I wanted to talk about water in Rome or whatever it is, and so I would picture a gigantic water canister on the sofa in my apartment. And I'd walk through my apartment depositing images of the things that I wanted to remember. And when I wanted to recall those memories, I'd walk back through that apartment and see those images in the places where I left them. That's a technique that came to be known as the memory palace. It's how Cicero memorized his speeches. It's how medieval scholars memorized entire books. And it's fundamentally the technique that these competitors in this sport of competitive memorizing remember hundreds of random numbers and all sorts of other things that they're called upon to remember.
Did you find after doing all this memory training, did it change just your daily life and the way you noticed things and thought about things and remembered them?
Here's what it changed. What I learned in the process of trying to train my memory were some pretty basic principles. And I think the most important of which is the importance of paying attention. Right? We only remember the things that we pay attention to. And attention is something that you can actually will. So there are people sitting out here in this audience, and I see a few of them right now who are dozing off. And we all know that experience, right? You're sitting in a kind of boring lecture, and your mind goes someplace else. And we also know the experience of telling ourselves, wait a second, snap back into it. Like, you know what, I'm actually going to pay attention here. And we can bring ourselves back. And that's an act of will. And that is what it takes to remember what's going on around you, is being engaged. And I don't know any trick for making yourself engaged, except constantly having at the front of your mind that I have to be the kind of person who's going to be engaged. And I don't know if that's like a mantra to have floating around, but that is the most essential thing.
Can I just 2 points that what you said here raised. One of them is you asked about meditation before, and it relates very nicely to this. At some point, maybe 5-7 years ago, I was interested in meditation because we study something, and this will be my second point. We study mind wandering. What happens when the brain just goes somewhere else? So I decided to take this mindfulness workshop in Worcester, where it was invented by John Kabat-Zinn, and I decided to go and just immerse in the experience and not to be a scientist when I'm there, and just let them teach me what they do. If I don't like it at the end, I just won't play with this, but I'm just going to listen to them and not be critical, just suspend disbelief. And on the first, the second sentence of the first lesson, she said, we're going to teach you diffused attention. which is for a scientist like an oxymoron, because attention is a spotlight. That's how you learn about this in graduate school. It's really a spotlight that takes you to points of interest in your scene or anywhere in your environment. And now she talks about diffused attention. So I already knew it's going to be entertaining for me. But after a while, I realized actually that they're ahead of our understanding, in the sense that it is possible. And part of the things that they accomplish with the proper meditation is the fact that you, in a way, the way I look at it in my terminology of top-down and expectations, they just quiet down these expectations. So you let everything come into you without any, they call it judgment, but we call it more expectations or predictions, and use your memory. So I guess they use less of their memory when they're meditating, and just and it's not only, I think it changes the way they are and the way they think. So it's not only when they meditate that they become more fully aware of their environment and are able to be talking here, but noticing the lights and noticing the reflections and etc. So I think that could be actually what you're getting at, and maybe there is other way than just reminding yourself. That could be another type of meditation, but they are striving for, and I wonder if their memory is better than others. Yeah, and the second thing, it's not completely related, so I don't have to say it, but okay. But people call it mind wandering, and I remember I had a postdoc once. She's actually a professor at Columbia now, but she kept talking about mind wandering, and with my limited English, I said, wandering sounds aimless to me, and I don't think the brain does anything aimless, because as Josh, the neuroscientist, talked about the energy that the brain takes, and these are exactly the things that we've been thinking about. It's like, why would the brain do something so aimless if it takes so much energy? And think about the function of mind wandering. And again, it sounds like an oxymoron in the sense that mind wandering is idle, right? So the brain apparently doesn't go to sleep when you're not doing anything. When you're stuck in traffic, when you're in the shower, as we all know, we don't turn off the brain and wake it up again when we need to. But rather, the brain is very active. And in fact, if you look at these nice, colorful brains that come from MRI, from functional MRI, of brains at rest, you'll see that they're vigorously active. There's a giant network of things that subjects do when they lie in the magnet when you're not asking them to do anything. So usually you give them a block of trials, they do things that are pretty intense, and then you tell them, wait for 10 minutes until we start the next one, or 2 minutes, or half a minute. And it turns out that all these rest periods are extremely active, and it made us think, what do people do when they don't do anything, when they mind wander elsewhere when there's a boring lecture. And it turns out, just to go back to this idea of memory as a vehicle to help us prepare, one way that we accumulate this memory, obviously, is with experience, right? We have to go through things. We fall from the bicycle for the first time, we scratch our knees, it stays in our memory, and it makes us more careful next time. But our beautifully powerful brains can actually simulate also these experiences, right? So we don't have to go through if I tell you, and that's an example from my good colleague Dan Gilbert, if I tell you, would you like to try an ice cream, an avocado and sardines ice cream? You don't have to taste it to say, I don't want it. You just simulate, and you understand that that's an experience you don't want to go through, even though you haven't experienced it, right? So we don't have to go through everything in order to remember it. We can make these simulations. So mind wandering, one of the main purposes, is to create what we call memories, because they haven't been experienced, but they've been mentally experienced, and we don't just discard the result of this mind wandering. We store it in memory, just like any experienced memories, and they become as powerful in our preparation for the future in terms of we can access and pull the results of these simulations.
Moshe, how much do we know about the way children remember? And is that markedly different than adults?
Well, I'm not sure we know much about how different they are in the way they remember. We do see, as people who have young kids at home, it's very interesting to see how the entire world is interesting for them. Everything is new. And it's pretty depressing to think that in our everyday life, and since you're maybe 12, things are repeating. It's very rare. When was the last time you encountered something that's completely new, right? I mean, even these goggles where people have been talking about them, but you know, we know that everything around us is related to something else, or it looks like something else, or behaves like something else. So it's a little depressing to realize that our environment doesn't consist of much novelty, and most of the things are almost familiar to us.
And yeah, I mean, just this makes me come back to the original question you asked me of, like, how do you live your life differently? And what Moshe was talking about earlier, which is the importance of novelty. And we know that novel experiences are more memorable. And so the question is, how do we put ourselves in the way of more novel experiences? How do we make sure that we're doing things that are new, that are different, that are gonna be memorable? I think that's a worthwhile thing to have in the front of your mind as you move through the world. What am I doing today that is gonna be different from what I did yesterday or the day before, and therefore more memorable?
Thanks. Just also wanted to just go back, Moshe, and talk about your background, which seems kind of unusual given what you're doing today, that and you've taught psychiatry in a medical school, you haven't gone to medical school yourself, you really bring together so many different interests. Can you tell us a bit about your educational background and how you came to be doing this work?
Sure, if you promise that you ask Josh also about his educational background. I don't want to be singled out here. I feel like a bad student. Well, and just to make sure I didn't mishear you, I didn't go to medical school. I'm a PhD, not an MD. Yeah, I think it's one thing led to another. I started, my bachelor was in electrical engineering, and then I never practiced engineering. I switched directly to math and computer science at the Weizmann Institute in Israel. And then I did my PhD in the US, which was more in psychology and starting to gravitate towards neuroscience. And my postdoc was already at Harvard. I was neuroscience proper, but with emphasis on cognitive psychology. So that's a field that's called, as we said, cognitive neuroscience. And I've been playing with this thing since. But it's interesting, I mean, when you just look at it in my CV or just a list, it looks pretty erratic that you just jump from one thing to another. But I promise you, there's a very coherent thread that led from one thing to another. It's not a multiple change of hearts. Let's hear about your background, Josh.
Josh, how did you get interested in memory?
I mean, totally back. I don't know what I'm doing nearly as well as Moshe knows what he's doing. No, I studied science in college and evolutionary biology, ecology and evolutionary biology, and I thought I was going to be a scientist. I thought my dream was to be like Stephen Jay Gould and to be sitting in an armchair, a leather armchair somewhere and having big thoughts about the world. Turns out, though, Stephen Jay Gould, before anybody would listen to him having big thoughts, first had to become the world's leading expert in an obscure genera of land snail. And that just, I discovered that's actually what you had to do to become a scientist, and it was too boring for me. So instead, I just write about real scientists like Moshe.
And explain the title of the book.
Moonwalking with Einstein? So Moonwalking with Einstein refers to a mnemonic that I used in the process of becoming the US memory champion to help me remember the order of a shuffled pack of playing cards, which is one of the events in the US Memory Championships. How quickly can you memorize 52 cards in an order you've never seen them before? So I conjured up an image of Albert Einstein. You can picture the big white Jufro and the tongue hanging out of his mouth, but moonwalking like Michael Jackson with the diamond-studded white glove and the penny loafers, dancing backwards across a dance floor. That helped me remember a set of playing cards. And I chose the title because if you take a second to think of that image, that's really memorable. And my hope, it was totally crass marketing. My hope was that when somebody was standing in line at Barnes & Noble, what was that book about memory? I heard about it on NPR. Einstein was doing moonwalking with Einstein. Yes, I'm going to go buy that book.
So your second option was Nazis down your nose?
That's going to be the sequel, yeah.
So before we turn to some of these questions, Moshe, what about, so many people are concerned with memory loss and, as we age, just how much of it is normal to sort of not have, for our memories to feel that they're not operating as well as they did, and Maybe you can also talk a little bit about what a brain looks like when there is some sort of disease.
Yeah. So unfortunately, that's a loss of memory with aging. That's a field that there aren't too many good news yet. But there is some hope, and there are some. I talked once after I arrived to Israel, back to Israel a year and a half ago. I talked once about what I'm about to say, and since then I became the most popular speaker in assisted living houses. People have been inviting me. They all wanted to hear how do they preserve memories from the Haganah and the birth of Israel. So I'm selling bottles outside if you want to improve your memory. No, but there are some things that are good for maintaining memory, and of course, everybody's at a certain age start to play with Sudokus or with cross word puzzles and things like this. And I'm not sure if the effect of these games has been proven. I'm not familiar with the literature that shows, but it makes sense that when we continue to engage our systems, they just continue to give back, right? And when we desert them, like, I don't want to say things that might make some people, I don't know about your lifestyle, so some people feel bad. So obviously it's very individual, and whatever works for you is great. But retirement is one big step function for many people, not everybody, that kind of decline, the cognitive decline in general, but memory in particular, can be really expedited because people just stop being busy. But if you retire and you're very busy with all kind of volunteer work, you don't have to get a paycheck to maintain your memory. You just have to be busy. Second thing that we know about is, and imagine me saying this in an assisted living house, but I'm talking about aerobic exercise, and people are, coming with their IV to the lecture hall. I say, you guys should be running. It's good for you. So I'm kind of relaxing it, but even walking. But overall, and the reason is it's not one of these, TV kind of day TV suggestions. There is a lot of research that shows one of the interesting findings in neuroscience from the last 20 years is a concept called adult neurogenesis. So we used to believe that we are born with a certain amount of neurons, with brain cells, and it's all downhill from there. We don't have new ones, but we learned that even at a very old age, we can grow new neurons, especially in the hippocampus that Josh mentioned, the seat of memory, so to speak, even though remember the entire brain is really dedicated for memory, but hippocampus can grow new neurons in different ways. And one of them, one very powerful way, is with aerobic exercise. Second way, by the way, I mentioned depression before. Depressed people lose the volume of the hippocampus, and a successful treatment, either with Prozac or with psychotherapy, helps again grow new neurons in this area. So that's very interesting. And the last thing that made me really popular in the assisted living neighborhood is that, and that's a recent finding, not ours, but it's very appealing. And again, it has been known for a while, but not necessarily the effects on the brain, is social interactions. So you can be stuck in your living room with all the Sudoku you want, but it's much more powerful if you spend time with other people. And we don't know if it's the intellectual interaction with other people, or just that it maintains you at the edge of your seat, or is it just something else more social. But it is very helpful for being together. Jewish also, right?
Yeah. It helps to be Jewish, yeah.
Food.
Thanks. We've got lots of questions here. This is a good one. Some people seem to have photographic memory. Why do some people have it and others don't?
Photographic memory is a myth. It doesn't exist. There's exactly one case in the scientific literature of a person with a truly photographic memory, as in the ability to blink, take a snapshot, a Xerox, if you will, of whatever it is they just saw and reproduce it later. It was a paper published in the journal Nature in 1970, one of the most influential scientific journals in the world, by a Harvard vision scientist. who you may know, actually.
And actually, his wife was the subject.
Well, that's the punchline. No, it's a real problem. It turned out he ended up marrying the woman he wrote about, and I actually called him up. Charles Strohmeyer called him up, and
And she refused to participate in other experiments. That's the second punchline.
thank you very much. Can you come on the road with me? And just never come on stage. No, so that's the other punchline. She's never been tested again. And so when I asked this guy, I was like, come on. I mean, really? This doesn't sound like very good evidence for photographic memory. There's one woman, it's your wife, and she's never been tested again. And he said, it's true, I stand by my research, but it's not the best evidence of this being a widespread phenomenon. So I think it's interesting that paper's never been retracted. But most psychologists I've talked to find it pretty fishy.
Actually, if somebody tells you that what George said was wrong, I have a photographic memory, you can challenge them by asking them to look at a picture of a sentence, let's say 3 or 4 words, right? And then ask them to say the letters, letter by letter, from right to left or from left to right, depending on what country you are. And you see that it's really hard to, if it were photographic memory, it would have been just as easy to say the letters from both directions. So that's an easy test to show that it is a myth indeed.
Josh, I remember asking you if you had ever met somebody who was able to do that test in the Talmud, that they know every page so well that they could, put a pin in and find the words. Have you ever met anybody who can do that?
I exchanged emails with people who claimed they know somebody who could do it. There was a paper published in a scientific journal in 1917 about by a non-Jewish psychologist who claimed to have witnessed this feat. It's funny, I was last night with an Israeli filmmaker who was telling me precisely this story about somebody he knew who claimed to have been able to, you could put your finger on any line of the Talmud and start reading and he could finish the sentence. And he met this guy with a famous Israeli actor. And the Israeli actor said, it's nothing. Pull out Shakespeare. And the guy pulled whatever it was, Macbeth, off the shelf. And he said, start anywhere. And of course, he could finish any line in Macbeth or in Hamlet or in Twelfth Night or in any number of Shakespearean plays. And the answer is, if you spend enough time engaged with one limited body of information, it's a feat of single-mindedness. This is not a reflection of some sort of innate genius or anything more than the fact that when you put a lot of time and a lot of effort into engaging with one particular body of information, you can develop an incredible memory for that body of information.
Thanks. What do genes have to do with this?
A lot. Yeah, there's a lot of genetics in everything that relate to the brain. So it's nothing unique to say there. Yes, it's very important.
What about how are dreams associated with memory?
How?
How are dreams associated
Dreams.
with memory?
So, I mean, this is a real active body of research. Our sleep. Why is it that we shut down for roughly a third of our time on planet Earth, don't engage with the world, make ourselves vulnerable to being eaten by leopards, and generally go catatonic? It's really weird. And we don't fully have an explanation for why we engage in this bizarre behavior, much less why so many other species on the planet also engage in this bizarre behavior. One of the really interesting suggestions is that our dreaming is essential to the consolidation of our long-term memories. And somehow, in our sleep, we are making sense of what happened during the day, processing it, storing it, setting it aside for the future. And it's possible that one of the reasons that when we are dreaming, our dreams so often feel like this surreal recombination of things that happened. Why is it that that guy whose name was mentioned today suddenly shows up in my dream that night? That may be an artifact of the ways in which our brains are taking that information from the day and somehow reconfiguring it so that it becomes sticky in our long-term memories. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah. You stole my punchline again.
We should really have a road show.
What happens when something rings a bell?
Well, it's related to a whole set of such questions as, what is déjà vu, for example, right? So déjà vu is harder to explain. I don't think it's possible, but rings a bell, the professional, or the more, the jargon for it will be, there are two actually related phenomena. One of them is feeling of knowing, and the other one is tip of the tongue. And people studying both of them pretty extensively, and they're both interesting. I find feeling of knowing even more interesting. So it's kind of, it's meta-knowledge. A tip of the tongue is something that obviously we have a hard time accessing, but we know it's there and it's about to be retrieved. But the feeling of knowing is remembering that you remember something, but you can't access it. So that's kind of, you have meta-knowledge about your knowledge without being able to reach it. So that's more interesting in my mind. But both of them are still mysteries, but we're getting closer, especially with imaging, and we can look at things.
I mean, one of the things that phenomenon of having something on the tip of your tongue, or knowing you know it, and you can kind of picture it, but you can't find the word for it, it points to the ways in which, as Moshe was saying at the very beginning of this evening, our memories are not some single monolithic thing, right? So our memory of cup, there's the semantic, the word cup, there is this concept of cup, there's maybe an image of cup. Somehow these are all sort of happening, stored differently, and it seems to be the case that we can access a piece of that when we have this weird phenomenon of tip of the tongue, but maybe we're not accessing the whole thing. Maybe we're somehow we're not following the right set of pathways to the actual word cup. And you say maybe we'll figure this out with imaging. Part of the problem with imaging, with functional MRIs, is we have this incredible technology for seeing what regions of the brain are lighting up or are activated when we're engaging in some behavior, engaging some sort of thought. But what's happening at the level of neural circuitry, we can't pick it up with the resolution of fMRIs. And so it's part of the reason we may not fully understand is we don't have the technology to actually see it happening in the brain because it's happening at such a fine-grained level. Is that accurate?
Well, partially.
All I hope for is partial accuracy. I'm just a journalist.
Yes, I mean, we study a certain phenomena from multiple levels of resolution. People, go in with electrodes and people look at the molecular biology level, at genes. People look at entire systems with MRI, or look at EEG or MEG that helps you understand dynamics. So there are different resolutions, and if you can bring people of different resolutions to look at the same problem, you are able to understand things better. But you're right that the resolution of MRI by itself would not be enough for certain questions. Yes?
Good, thanks. Josh, someone is asking if you would talk about some of the teachers that you worked with. I mean, people who helped you train.
Oh, yeah. One of the really wonderful things about this world of competitive memorizing is that it's filled with, as you can imagine, sort of eccentric characters. And I was very, very lucky that one of these characters, a guy called Ed Cook, who had one of the best memories in all of Europe, sort of swooped in and took me under his wings and decided that he was going to teach me everything that he knew about this ancient art of remembering, which is much, much more well established and developed in Europe, where they take this very, very seriously, as opposed to America, where the truth is American memory champions have never really competed at the same level as European memory champions. The people who take this most seriously are the Germans. There is, it's a whole thing to get into. There's something about this that just truly strokes a pleasure spot in the Teutonic soul. And they have high school championships and regional championships and state championships and national championships. The national German memory champion is a celebrity. He's on TV all the time. And the Germans are are very into this in a way that the Americans simply aren't. So I was very lucky to have a European tutor teach me all of these techniques, and that's part of the reason that I was able to win this U.S. Memory Championship, was that I had the advantage of European skills behind me and a European tutor.
And then you were admitted to the European Memory Association, right? Didn't you get into
Well, I would call it a secret society, except that I wrote about it in my book, so it's not so secret anymore. I don't know if everybody's happy about that, by the way. Yeah, they've got a club called the KL7, the Knights of Learning. And I was admitted to the Knights of Learning after first, I think I had to drink 2 pints of beer, memorize 49 digits, and kiss 2 women who I'd never met before on the cheek. That was the, yeah. And then I belonged to the. That was how you enter the Sancto Sanctorum of the Kodesh HaKodashim of the world of memory.
That's another one. How does watching more than usual television affect our memory?
Watching the usual.
Watching more than usual television.
Well, I think it reduces the amount of novelty, and there's less and less news. I grew up with a grandfather that in Israel every hour. Now it's every half an hour, unfortunately. But every hour there's these beeps and news, and he would quiet everybody down and shh, as if the world is coming to an end in this very moment. And once I played, I recorded the news from before and played them again, and didn't even notice. So I think. I think it's pretty clear that that it numbs us in some way, but
I don't know. I mean, look, what makes things memorable is when we're engaged deeply, and watching television is, generally speaking, a passive act. And if we could invent a form of television that required you to talk back to it and think and process, then maybe that would be a good thing. But maybe that's what the internet is. I don't know. But simply watching something is a way to while away the hours. I don't have a TV.
Well, people talk about watching TV late at night, like what our ancestors used to do with sitting around the fire. I mean, we will never know, right? But just something that relaxes you and calms you down. And I think if TV becomes more interactive, less people would watch it. So I think that we do need this winding down activity. It doesn't have to be TV, but I think it ought to be numbing.
Just one more question. What about the connection between memory and one's sense of time?
I'm not sure there is a direct relation, but the sense of time is an interesting field of research also. How do we keep time, keep track of time, and come to think of it, maybe it could be a type of memory, but I don't think there's a direct relation in research. There is, again, we're going back to this issue that we didn't elaborate on, but I did mention it a couple of times today, that, well, this is more perception than memory, but things that are highly emotional seem to be advancing at a different speed, right, a different pace. So they talk about hitters in baseball that see the ball approaching and they see it almost like in slow motion, but most of us don't have this experience. But if you're close to some kind of an accident or something really striking happens, you almost feel like in the Matrix that things are kind of slow motion and expand. So the perception of time might change depending on the specific content of what's happening. But I don't think it's directly memory.
So there is this bizarre phenomenon, which some people in this room may have experienced. I feel like I've begun to experience it, which is that the older one gets, the faster time seems to fly. And I actually think this has been quantified in a rigorous way. It's one of a number of strange effects with how our memories change over time. Another one of these strange effects is the reminiscence bump, which is when you ask people who are in their 70s or 80s to recall a memory from their life, they're much more likely to recall memories, not much more, they are significantly more likely to remember events that happened in their 20s. Why is that, right? I mean, they had a whole lifetime of events. Why is their mind being drawn back to their 20s? And it might be linked to this other phenomenon of why life seems to speed up as we get older, which is, it comes back to novelty, I think. This is my hypothesis, and it's not my hypothesis, it's somebody else's hypothesis, but up on stage it can be my hypothesis, that when we're young, our lives are filled with novel experiences. When you are in your 20s, you're doing everything for the first time. You're striking out on your own. You're finding your soulmate. You're having children, possibly. You're getting your first job. You're taking, it's the time when if you're going to hike the Inca Trail, it's probably when you're going to do it. And then as you get older, your life falls into a kind of routine. And as your life falls into routine, routine is the enemy of memory, because you're doing the same thing every day, every week, every month, every year. And those days that are all the same get processed as sort of one unit in your memory, and they disappear. So that may be part of the reason why life seems to speed up as we get older, so we have fewer of the sorts of memories that become landmarks and anchor our sense of time. We say, yes, I did that. That was like 3 weeks after I took that trip to Paris. Or I did that. That was around the same time my first son was born. That was around the time I changed jobs. We have these chronological landmarks that help us shape our understanding of time's passage. And perhaps those landmarks become fewer and farther between, and that maybe has some effect on how we reckon with the passage of time in our lives. So that's a hypothesis. I don't know if it's true, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, it's a good hypothesis that we share, but it's not the entire story, because you can think about instances where you're just sitting and waiting for something to happen, right? And there's nothing novel that's happening there, but just time seems to be stretching and stretching and stretching. It was also only 7 minutes that you've been in line, but it seems like it was 3 hours. So there are different things that affect the perception, the subjective perception of the passage of time.
Great. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Sandy.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.